People have been fascinated by the gods of ancient Egypt for centuries, from the Greeks and the Romans, to the French and English colonizers, to the over 13 million people who visit Egypt every year. The mythology of ancient Kemet has its allure, but it's even deeper and more complex than most people realize. And in those depths, there are demons. Hey folks, this is James, aka Thresciornis, and I know I've said this before, but this video is truly special to me. The subject matter has been the focus of my magical work for the past couple of years. Later on in the video, we'll get into some of the motivations and thought process behind that. But before we jump into the background, well, this is a video about ancient Egypt. And so we're going to tell you about our Ko-Fi fundraising campaign for our trip to Egypt next year. We would love to give you a magician's eye view of the ancient sites, and for that, we're going to need money for permits and some better camera equipment to truly capture the majesty of the monuments, temples, and tombs. Please go to our Ko-Fi page to donate. A link is in the description below. Though it's difficult for me at this time to provide much in the way of bonus material, I have posted scripts to many of our episodes, which will be made available to those who make a monthly donation. So we really need to define our terms on this one, as scholars in the field have yet to come to a consensus on them. Some of this is my perspective, and there are compelling arguments for using different names, but on Scroll of Thoth, you're getting a magician's point of view. Now, the ancient Egyptians themselves had terms for god and goddess. They had terms for the transformed parts of the human soul that would live on after death. Divine spirits of the kings and queens had their own category as well. But there exists a vast record of spiritual beings that fall outside of these categories for the ancient Egyptians, and they had no general term for them. So scholars have had to use loan words to describe this class of being. Some prefer to use the term daimon, some use the word genii. Old school Egyptologists still use the term minor god, and many scholars do use the term demon. It's a difficult choice for scholars, as culturally, people generally associate the word demon with something malevolent. And many of these beings did have a destructive or even anti-human purpose, but certainly not all of them. One commonality is they all lived in or came from the Dawat, the Egyptian underworld. As I talked about in my video on Goetia, and from that perspective, the word demon is not a judgment on a spirit's character, but on its origins, and that they are all spirits of the underworld. So that's why I'm sticking with the term demon. But it's important to note that these beings have a wide range of characteristics, and there are always exceptions to the rule. The reason why they are seen as separate from the gods are two aspects. One, the gods always have a role in creation. If not the initial creation, they create or personify something that had an influence on the lives of ancient Egyptians. Gods also have cults and worshippers. The vast majority of the beings we're talking about here do not, though once again there are exceptions to the rule. While the ancient Egyptians themselves didn't have a catch-all name for these demons, they appear everywhere in Egyptian art and literature. You can see them in abundance in funerary texts, from the drawings on coffins to the Book of the Dead. They can also be found on amulets and wands, and are talked about in stories and medical texts. According to the Egyptologist Cassius Bukowska, an Egyptian demon is really any divine being not worshipped in a temple, and they were everywhere. Spakowska, working with the University of Swansea, has cataloged over 4,000 demons from multiple sources. Our knowledge of the majority of these demons is vague at best, with some only known by pictorial representation. Some had proper names, others were only known by their epitaph, which could be a description of their appearance or their character. Things like Swallower of Shadows, Big and Fiery, Bellower, the Rapacious One, You with your tongue on your back, He whose face is hot, and the rather complicated demon, He who lives on meat sacrifice, dog-faced, human-skinned, keeper of the bend of the waterway of fire, who swallows shadows, who snatches hearts, throws the lasso, and yet is not seen. As depicted in the multitude of paintings, engravings, and statues, the demons follow the same themes that the Egyptians used for their gods. Many are composite creatures having human and animal features, sometimes several animals. The animals chosen to represent certain characteristics of the demon are simply showing their power equal to the animals used in their makeup. Archaeologists have found many statues of snakes with engravings identifying them as demons, which are believed to be used to ward off against physical snakes. Another common motif is that many of the demons appear armed, bristling with knives and other weapons. Some even have heads and limbs made of knives, once again showing their power and ability. And note that most of these armed demons were not malevolent, but were seen as protectors. Demons fulfill many roles in Egyptian cosmology. They could be messengers between gods and mortals, and gods with other gods. They were seen as liminal beings, border crossers, who perhaps had an easier time transversing between the living world and the duat. In many funerary texts, they also acted as gatekeepers, guarding the entries into the underworld and judging the souls that come before them. The Book of the Dead contains many spells on how to defeat, circumnavigate, or placate these demons. Demons were often used as protectors, called upon to guard sacred spaces and to guard the bodies of the dead from defilement. There were demons that caused nightmares and demons to protect from nightmares. Demons that brought disease, and those that defended against disease or cured the disease. In medical texts, these beings were often one and the same, and the doctor exorcised the demon as well as providing other treatments. Demons could possess an individual in whole or in part, sometimes only possessing the heart, head, or limbs. According to Egyptologist Rita Lucarelli, some gods had gangs of demons in their employ. This is well documented in beliefs of Sekhmet and Bastet. These demons were blamed for spreading disease with an ill wind upon command from the goddess. They were one of the few groupings of demons that did have their own categorization in ancient Egypt, called the demons of darkness, in Egyptian, the Kiati. It makes this magician think that many of the Egyptians' gods were assumed to have their own retinues, and there are mentions of spirits that served other gods. In a sense, not unlike the concept of demons having legions under their command, as found in many of the grimoires. Though the majority of demons from ancient Egypt remain a mystery to us, there are a few demons of note. Possibly the most often depicted, due to her role in the Book of the Dead, is the demon Amut, a fearsome creature that's part lion, part hippo, and part crocodile. Amut's singular role is to devour the souls who do not pass judgment during the weighing of the heart, the last and ultimate gatekeeper. Only slightly less famous is Apep or Apophis, the demon snake that lives in the Duat and attacks Ra's solar barge when he passes through the underworld at night. Many magicians find Apep to be a draconic figure. It's interesting to note that the one god who can defeat Apep is Set, the god who is most often portrayed as being a force for destruction in ancient Egypt, an indicator of how the ancient Egyptians had nuanced views of good and evil. Maybe the most popular demon for the ancient Egyptians themselves is Bes. Bes is complicated to say the least. He was known throughout Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Levant, and in Nubia as well, where the ancient Egyptians may have first learned of him. Bes is depicted as a hairy dwarf, bow-legged, with a tail, and sticking his tongue out. A clue to his foreign origins comes from his representations, as almost all of Egyptian art showed figures in profile, while images of Bes are frontal perspective. Bes was seen as jolly, rapacious, and a lover of dance and sexual activities. Bes was a protector of households, especially of women during childbirth. Later, in the New Kingdom, Bes would develop his own cult and become the defender of all the good things in life. Demons were a part of many magical operations. They appear on amulets of protection and coffins of the deceased. There were spells to exorcise demons and bring them under the magician's control. What the Egyptians lacked, however, was a consistent demonology. No long lists of who served who and where their place was in the scheme of things. Their magic was not about communicating with demons, but using them for a purpose. And this makes things a little difficult for practicing from the emergent animism perspective, which is all about communication. I came to the conclusion while working with the more popular medieval grimoires that perhaps those were not the spirits I wanted to talk to. I wanted to talk to spirits that were inclined to be my friends. Could I find demons in the service of Thoth? Part of this is my innate desire to take the path less traveled. Though there was no Egyptian demonology, perhaps I could create one of my own. To do this, I borrowed methodologies from the grimoires, like using the agency of a higher power, in this case Thoth, having a circle to act as a portal, and providing spirits with a means of communicating. I'm sure I'll detail this in a future video, along with examples, and until then, I'm happy to say I've had some success, and believe that I have found at least a few demons that I communicate with on a regular basis. Let me know if you want to see videos on that, and maybe I'll call it Emergent Goetia. For those of you who want to dig deeper on this subject, I highly recommend the work of the aforementioned Dr. Cassius Bakowska, an associate professor of Egyptology at the University of Swansea and the director of the Ancient Egyptian Demonology Project. Also, my favorite, Dr. Rita Lucarelli, who gives excellent lectures on all things magical in Egypt. There's also Dr. Panyotis Kosolis. He's a major contributor in the field as well. And my apologies if I pronounced any of those names incorrectly, but I have included links in the show notes to some of their work. I especially recommend the book Demon Things, Ancient Egyptian Manifestations of Liminal Entities. I really hope you enjoyed that one, and you know what you need to do now. Hit that like and subscribe so you can see more Scroll of Thoth. Also, if you want to help the show, check out our Redbubble store, where we have Scroll of Thoth merchandise and some other fun t-shirts, apparel, and books and phone cases and all those things. Thank you for watching to the end, and we'll see you next time.